request webinar. I do need to make sure that everybody's on mute. I'm hearing still quite a bit of background noise. Please do make sure that your phones, if you're called in via phone or through computers, you have muted yourself through WebEx and then also on your phones. We can still hear some typing and breathing and other conversations. So please do make sure of that. We will get to a section later for Q&A, and I will answer some questions at that time. And so we'll go ahead and get started. So today, today we're going to talk a little bit about carryovers. We sent out some information last week, or I sent out some information last week that is the carryover submission checklist. And in that, we'll talk a Again, I'm sorry, I'm having to stop again because there's some background noise. Josh, please make sure everybody is muted if you could, please. And I can try to talk a little louder, but I do need everybody on mute or else we can't hear. Okay, so this is the carryover webinar. We sent out some information last week. I'm going to be reviewing some of that information in this webinar, and then I will be going over those things, and then we will have time at the end for questions. So please do mute yourself right now, and Donald, I'm pretty sure I can hear you going. Please make sure you're muted. Calling user 23, please make sure you're muted. I can see the little noise bubbles. So I'm gonna, if we can't figure it out, I'll just tell you who it is. And so I just want to make sure that we're able to hear, because I don't want to have to I don't want to go over it again. Getting started. So I'm going to go over some basic information first, and then we're going to review a few other things. So now on your screen, you should be seeing some carryover background information. So we're going to go over some basic information first, and then we're going to go over requirements. So quickly, overview, the phrase unobligated balance is important here. So unobligated balances are funds that are not obligated by the grantee by the end of the budget period, and these are the funds that are available for carryover. The carryover funds should then be used to complete any objectives which remain unmet from the prior budget period. So grantees, it's important to know the difference between these two things, as unliquidated obligations are commitments of the recipient and are considered to be obligations, and therefore those should not be reported as unobligated balances. So there's unliquidated obligations, which is what you're supposed to be closing out here by the end of December, and then what you have left is the unobligated balance, and the unobligated balance is what is available for the carryover request. So those are a couple key pieces there. When you're thinking about carryover planning, it's important to note these. It's important to note these things. So first, in order to do and to file your carryover, you're going to need to file your annual SF-425 and ensure that your unliquidated obligations are 0. And that the reflected unobligated balance that is available for carryover from year 1 to year 2 is reflected there in the SF-425. The other thing the other important date here is that, and this is the second bullet point, that unobligated balance must still be in the payment management system in your PMS account, and it should match the unobligated balance reported on your your annual SF-425. So you report the unobligated balance in your annual SF-425, and then that same amount should be showing up in your payment management account. So those two things should match. If you are unsure about your PMS account balance, you are more than welcome to contact your payment management person, if you know them, or your OGM grants management specialist. I have noted here that the carryover requests are due by January 16th. So it is important here to remember that some people have been asking, obviously January 16th is a holiday. So that we understand that is the case. Just please plan, if you're not going to be in the office on the 16th, it should be submitted before you are not going to be in the office. So just if, obviously like we're not going to be in the office either on January 16th, so I would suggest you submitting it the Friday before if that is the last day that your organization will also be in the office. Otherwise, we do expect them all by January 16th. You can obviously turn them in earlier. The third bullet point here, just as a reminder, and we've said this before, but the existence of an unobligated balance is not a reason for carryover. Just because, it's stated another way, just because you have an unobligated balance does not mean that you have to carry it over. A carryover request means you must have unmet objectives from year one in order to justify the carryover, and then that is what the carryover request is made off of. And so in order to make sure that you all are, probably thinking in the right lines, we would strongly suggest you consult with your program specialist, so Kalia or Priscilla, regarding what unmet objectives you're looking at completing and carrying over, and then what unobligated balance, how much of your unobligated balance you're looking at carrying over. One important note here is that you do not have to carry over, your entire unobligated balance just because you have an unobligated balance. You can carry over a lesser amount. So if you have $500,000 unobligated for your unobligated balance, but you can request $200,000, that's fine. And also with your unmet objectives, it works similarly. When you think about your unmet objectives, you're going to want to think about what can reasonably be done with your carryover funds, and sometimes that may mean that you're not carrying over every single unmet objective. So you may carry over some portion of the unmet objectives depending on how much money you may have unobligated at the end as well. Those two things have to line up, and they have to, obviously, they're connected. But we also want it to be reasonable. So there's no reason that you have to carry over every single unmet objective, and there's no reason that you have to carry over every dollar of unobligated funds. It can be some portion of those things. They just need to be connected, and so that's what's an important consideration to take into account. I would also suggest, again, with that caveat, that you talk to your program specialist about what you're considering for a carryover request, and then what all you're going to be tying to that carryover request, and then the reasonableness of kind of amounts and goals. So that's a little bit of just kind of things, big picture planning. So things to keep in mind directly related to the budget. So when you complete the carryover request, you are only completing the carryover request for the amount of money you are requesting to carry over. So if my organization is requesting $200,000 for carryover, my budget narrative, my SF424A, and my cover letter are all going to reflect $200,000 as my total. All of my funds documents will only add up to $200,000. I do not have to take my carryover amount and combine it with my year 2 amount and give me a new budget. I don't have to do anything like that. I am just providing a budget and budget narrative and matching documentation like the SF424A that is requesting the carryover amount only. So that's something else just as a reminder there. Then on the other thing we get a lot of questions on are what costs are considered in the carryover budget. So be aware of a couple things. One, carryover, the budget should not have items budgeted in it that are duplicative of any costs that are already provided in the year 2 budget. So what that means is if already in my year 2 budget, and so this is one where salary comes a lot into play, if I already have in my budget salary for a CNA instructor, I cannot, in my carryover request, also provide for the same salary for that CNA instructor because they are already being paid out of year 2. So you have to be careful to make sure the costs are not duplicative. The budget items should only reflect the items needed to meet the goals of these additional participants, so additional tuition, additional supportive services, and those costs should be broken down. If anyone does request, if anyone does want to request additional personnel funds, there's a couple important things to note. Obviously, one, they can't be duplicative of costs already provided for in the year 2 budget, but 2, any personnel funds as part of a carryover request are only temporary staff. You cannot funds past that. So if I want to add case managers through my carryover request, I could potentially do that, but then if I carried over $200,000 and part of that was for case management, if you think about year 3 now, you either have to build more case managers into your year 3 budget as a standalone budget. You're not going to get any more money for year 3, or you're going to only have to have temporary staff. So think about what you're planning for as far as staffing, goes, because any staffing included in a carryover request is only temporary in nature. So just be aware of that. Finally, if you have general questions about just guidance on how to do a budget narrative, so what it should look like, how much detail should be provided, anything of that nature, I would refer you all back to, there was a document that we created called Guidance on Budget Narratives, and then we also provided an example budget narrative during the non-competing continuation application process. So I would strongly encourage you all to take a look at that document because it provided some of that detail, and that is posted to our HPOG website. And it also, and you all obviously went through the NCC application process, so now you're also aware of kind of what the level of detail is needed. It's going to be consistent also with this carryover level of detail. Other things to keep in mind as far as program planning. So the approval of the carryover request is at the discretion of the awarding agency. So just like we talked about with just having an unobligated balance isn't a reason for carryover, the awarding agency as a whole then looks at those justifications, the amounts that the carryover request is for, and determines if it's reasonable and if the grantee has the capacity to carry over those goals, to achieve those goals, and to expend all of those funds. If the awarding agency does not feel that is the case, there is no requirement that we award the carryover request. If the request is approved, a notice of grant award is generated. So just like when you all did the NCC applications, you're going to get a notice from Grant Solutions that a new NGA is there, and then any conditions for approval will be noted. The NGA, when you get that new NGA, it will, on that particular document, combine your carryover balance and your year 2 award amount into one new amount. So if you have supplies in both your carryover and your year 2 award, those amounts are going to combine, and you're going to have a new category total for supplies, things of that nature, and you will have a new total. However, the carryover balance, even though those two things have been combined, the carryover balance is still to complete unmet objectives outlined in the carryover request, and then that's how we expect those funds to be expended. You are not tracking two separate sets of funds. That was a question we've gotten before in previous years. Do I have to track 2 separate sets of funds? No. They're one set of funds that is just your year 2 amount that is reported on your SF 425 for your year 2 amount. But that's just something, like that's how those funds were approved, and so that's what they are tied to. Grantees should also think about how you're going to meet your year 2 goals in addition to your carryover goals. That's something we talked about at the annual meeting, that it's something that you want to think about now and leading into the carryover of those goals, because you know, you kind of have to start planning for increased recruitment or things of that nature, you know, early. So you're going to want to think about, you know, how do you increase that recruitment? How do you know, how many people are you going to need to have ready for training? And think about all those things in light of things like college or semester schedules. You know, if you get approval for your carryover request at the, you know, let's say mid in February, that's in the middle of a semester. That's in the middle of a semester. So how, you know, what do you need to be thinking about planning for those things now? So that's some things to take into consideration. So we did provide, and I sent out the carryover submission checklist. It looks like this. It goes through all the required documents that you're going to need to submit to Grant Solutions. That form, and so those items are the SF424A, and that's an online form, so please complete that through Grant Solutions as an online form. The SF424, which is also an online form, again, can be completed through the submission checklist for a carryover. And we're going to, the next section of this webinar, we're going to talk about how you submit this in Grant Solutions, but I'm just going through the required documents right now. You'll need to do a cover letter. Oh, and I should also just remind everybody that for the SF424A, again, as a reminder, the only amount that you should reflect in here is your carryover amount request only. You do break it down the same way into object class categories and those kinds of things, but they should, those are only reflective of what you're requesting in your carryover. You'll fill out your SF424, and then you'll write and upload. This is one of the uploads, a cover letter. That cover letter needs to be signed by the authorized official, and we go through here and we state what that cover letter needs to contain. So you need to submit. It needs to have a clear statement and specify what objectives were not met, and that information should match your most recent PPR, right, because that's where you're getting your unmet objectives from. It needs to include a clear statement explaining why these goals were not met. Then it needs to include clear statement about the objectives and goals that will be accomplished with the carryover request and how they will be accomplished. And then a timeline for accomplishing that, and an affirmative statement that all carryover funds will be expended by the end of year 2. Going back just a minute to when we were talking about what things will be accomplished in the carryover request, that should, or in year 2, that should match your updated year 2 projections. So also under the cover letter upload, you're going to upload as a secondary document an updated year 2 work plan. So I'm not going to go through all of these directions, but what you're going to do is whatever unmet objectives you have from year 1 and whatever goals you're going to carry over, those goals are going to need to be added to your year 2 work plan. You are going to do that now during this application process in Pages. You are going to print out a new PPR for year 2, which is FY 2017 in Pages, and you're going to submit that with your carryover request. So for example, if I was a grantee and I was, like I said earlier, I was doing a $200,000 carryover request, and as part of it, I was going to enroll, I had an unmet objective. I missed enrolling by 50 people in year 1, and now in year 2, I'm going to enroll those additional 50 people that I didn't enroll in year 2.
Sure.
And so what you do there is,
Yeah, we are,
what,
Sheila. I'm sorry. I just haven't had a chance to look at it.
Thank you. Sorry, thanks. So what you're going to do there is, so I'll say that again. So if I did not enroll, I missed by 50 people in the first year, but now I want to carry over that goal into year 2. But my year 2 goal was 200 people. I'm now going to go into Pages. I'm going to update my year 2 enrollment to 250 people. So I'm taking my 200 plus the 50 I'm carrying over. My goal for year 2 is now 250 people. And then you know, I would update any of my other projections from there. And then in the potentially in the comments section, or not in the comments, excuse me, in the explanation of variance section, you can also explain where you added people. So you could do you could, in the explanation of variance, you could draw, we ask that you draw our attention to the places where you made those changes in the PPR, and so that helps us know where those things were, were updated. Which is, it's the second bullet point, second from the last bullet point on page 1. So that's where you're going to just note where any of those projections will have changed that were tied to carryover. And so we will do that. Any other projections that you're not changing, you're just going to leave alone. You don't have to change all projections. You just will update the projections that are tied to your carryover. And then again, once you've updated all those projections, you're going to print your new PPR, and you're going to upload that PPR with, you'll have your authorized official sign it along with the cover letter, and then you will upload your cover letter and your year 2 PPR with updated projections and notes on those projections to Grant Solutions for the application control checklist. Again, that's important because these changes in projections show what measurable goals are going to be tied to that carryover. Finally, the last couple things you're going to be uploading are your budget narrative. Again, just a reminder here that all of these costs need to be broken out, and that your budget narrative, the cost categories and totals should all match your SF424A, along with the fact that the total should only be your carryover request amount. It is not going to be any combination of other amounts. It is just the carryover request amount. And then we talk a little bit more here about explaining, providing the budget justification and explaining how those are going to be used to achieve the goals in your carryover request. And then finally, if you have a indirect cost rate, cost rate agreement, and you're going to be charging indirect costs, you're going to need to upload your indirect cost rate agreement that pertains to year 2 with your budget narrative. So under this one, if you have an indirect cost rate agreement that you are going to be charging indirect costs, and then you're going to upload that along with your budget narrative in that line. Finally, your SF425 upload is just, so obviously your SF425 is the one, your annual, is the one that's due at the end of December anyway. As soon as you file that SF425, you can actually file your carryover request. So if I filed my SF425 today and my unobligated balance matches in TMS, I can file my carryover request tomorrow. So you will have already uploaded your SF425 to Grant Solutions as a grant note. You are just going to upload it again under the control checklist for your carryover request. And then obviously a note here that a grantee could not request more than the unobligated balance. So just obviously be aware of that. So that's just a little bit more on that. I'm going to switch back to the webinar and walk just very quickly through how you're going to submit this in Grant Solutions, just because I know our new grantees aren't familiar with this, and then we will stop for questions to make sure we have plenty of time. So how do you submit a carryover request in Grant Solutions? So the very basics, you're going to log into Grant Solutions. You're going to go to your grants list and then select Manage Amendments. From there, you're going to go to the amendment screen where you could see something like this, or you could see something that has none listed, but either way, you're going to click on New. And then I'll show you what you would do in that case next. If you go in and you select New and you edit it or something and then you leave Grant Solutions, as long as you've saved and uploaded those documents, it's still there. If you log back into Grant Solutions later and you go to Manage Amendments, you're going to see something like that's on your screen currently. And so it's going to have the line of like a type of a carryover request. And then if you wanted to come back and edit it later that you created earlier, you would just select the Edit Amendment, which is the on the right, the top blue hyperlink. If you are just creating a new carryover request and not editing one, you would select New, and then you would select Carryover Request for the amendment type, and then there's a button at the bottom that says Create Amendment, and you would press that button. Once you press that button, it would bring up the Grant Solutions Amendment Application Control Checklist, and this is what it would look like. And then what you will do, it looks very similar to what everyone completed during the non-competing continuation application. And so what you would do is just go in and fill out the online forms that are required there in the checklist, and then you would upload any of the other documents that require upload, and then once everything is there in the sections and the way it needs to be, you will select Verify Submission, and then Final. It takes you to a different screen, and then you'll select Final Submission on the next screen. And then that really is it. So after that, you're just going to kind of see a blank screen, and then that's when OFA has received it. And then we will look at it and let you know if we have any questions. Very similarly to the NCC process, we take a look, and then we get back in contact with you if any additional questions or edits or anything of that nature might be needed. So broadly, that is, the items to keep in mind when planning for your carryover. The documents that are required for the carryover, I did not obviously read through the whole carryover submission checklist. I trust that you all can do that and review those details, but those were the main documents that are needed, and then we talked through how to submit it in Grant Solutions as an amendment. Just as another reminder, the carryover request will be due by January 16th. Yes, it is a holiday, so if you need to upload it earlier, that's totally fine, but we do need them all by January 16th. Let's go ahead and take questions. So a few things. You can either type them in, or if you have a question and you want to potentially, we can do this, you can take yourselves off of mute to ask a question. Just remember to put yourselves back on mute once you've done that. And then also make sure that, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. We can kind of go about this a couple different ways. The other thing to mention, and I think before we do questions, one other thing to mention is that if you do, there were some questions earlier about, do I have to be, we had suggested, that you've been making adequate progress. If you make, if you're progressing 25% towards your goals, then we see you've been making progress, and we're more likely to approve carryover. So let me say this: we know right now it's a little bit of a crazy. It's a difficult, this is an off time, right? Schools you're finishing up one semester and you're not quite, excuse me, into spring semester with enrollments in January. What we want to be assured of is that we just need to know that you have a clear plan for meeting your goals. That's what we need to know, and that's what we need to be assured of, and we need to know that you have the capacity to meet both your year 2 and carryover goals. And if you provide carryover justification and reasoning to that effect, then I think we're comfortable. But if we can't be assured of that, then that's when we get concerned about approving carryover, additional carryover requests. Okay, it looks like Tiziana has a question. Can we go ahead and unmute Tiziana, or Tiziana, you can unmute yourself too, I think.
We wait for.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Hey, Tiziana, I just heard you. Could you start again? I'm sorry. It just came through.
No problem. We have partners we have subcontractors. Do we need to amend the existing year 2 budget with them and submit it for prior approval with the carryover, or should we wait until the carryover has been approved to submit that amended contract?
Good question. Okay, so with the carryovers, so I'm assuming then you're talking about your carryover request would be in contractual. Is that accurate?
There will be some portions that are contractual,
okay.
Correct.
So when you do that, you'll have to, just like we did for the NCC, you'll give a breakdown of what those contractual costs are going to be, right? You'll give
correct.
like that line item. So for us, we see that, and we will approve that as part of your carryover. As part of your carryover request. So that's I would say we deal with that first as part of the carryover request. Then once we kind of get through that piece, I would say second to that, I would go ahead and get, particularly for this, and this has been an issue in previous years, I would go ahead and get your draft language together for your contract amendments, kind of like we did for year 2. I would get I would get the full budget amendment plan. I would get any contract amendment language done, right, if their contract goals are changing, things of that nature. I would go ahead and do that just to have it in draft form. Go ahead and send it to your program specialist as far as just language approval, and then as soon as you get your new NGA issuance that says, yes, you're good to go, then you can get it signed. But I would follow a I would follow a pretty similar process to when we did it in getting ready for year 2, because in that way you can act as soon as you get the approval. But OFA does need to approve the amendment, and so we can try to work it in that way.
Thank you. I have a second question, if you allow me. We started late, and so we have definitely unmet goals. Is there an expectation that we will meet all of the missed goals, or only the one that we can reasonably accomplish and be able to spread them through perhaps multiple years?
Yeah, good question. So the carryover requests for year 2 are goals that can be accomplished in year 2. That can be reasonably accomplished in year 2. So if I under-enrolled by 200 people, it's probably not likely that I can carry over all 200 people into 1 year if I'm already planning for 300 people in year 2, right? That's probably not likely. So what I would do is carry over some sub-portion or a reasonable amount thereof that I could accomplish in year 2, but then the expectation is to make my 5-year goals, I'm dividing up those unmet objectives in later years, but I should restate the fact that that does not mean you can continue to carry over money, and you have to work within your year 3, year 4, and year 5 awards. That also does not mean, so if I get a carryover request approved this year, I cannot then take that carryover request amount and spread it out amongst future years. My carryover award amount, the money itself, is only in year 2. It does not move forward at all. So I just wanted to clarify that too.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Virginia, I believe you are next. Sorry, it just came through. I'm sorry. For some reason, there's a delay. Virginia, could you start again? I'm so sorry.
Sure. I did type it in on the screen, but it really is the same question that I think you just answered. Do you have to say that you will make the full amount of the goal that you miss?
Yeah, no problem.
I'm all set.
Yes, same answer. Of course, no problem. Sorry, I should have had my window open.
That's okay.
All right. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any typed in. Again, you can. Yes, thank you.
So in the chat box, Patrice asked the question, can we use dollars for advertising to recruit participants? And will the PowerPoints be available for grantees?
Sure. Yes to both. So yes, you can use funds, carryover funds to recruit participants, but it would need to be tied right to unmet goals. So if you have an unmet goal of enrollment, right, I missed my enrollment by 50 people, I'm going to carry over that goal. Now I need to increase my recruitment in order to reach more people. That is then tied to the unmet goal of enrollment. Again, and I stress this, the amounts obviously have to be reasonable, you know, so we can't, you know, magically decide that recruiting those people are going to cost, you know, $100,000 or something. That's an extreme example, but it would have to be a reasonable amount. So there is, you know, there is that. And then the other, as far as PowerPoints, yes, they will be available. We will get those posted to our HPOG website. I think Dana has a question.
Hello.
Hi, Dana.
So we want to do, say, for example, OJT, some of the requests that's a prior approval request that we currently don't have in year 2, but would like to use it in the carryover. How would that work? Because if we're submitting the budget saying we want to use OJT, but it's currently not approved, how do we do that?
Great question. So a couple things. Obviously, one, tied to unmet objectives. So, you know, that would definitely have to be tied if it was tied to employment or training completion or whatever. Obviously, would have to, you know, that would have to be there first. Second, if you're adding anything, so that's a good question, adding something like OJT or something that needs prior approval. So maybe you're adding a supportive service for immunizations or something. Again, it would just be for the carryover numbers, but you would need to submit that policy to your program specialist at the same time. So those two things would have to be kind of approved simultaneously. So because you're probably familiar with this, but what will happen is they would see that and then they would flag it for you and say, we don't have a policy on that. So if you're going to be adding something or putting something in your budget that does require some sort of other prior approval flag, then you would go ahead and have that policy as pulled together as possible, hopefully complete, in order to get that approved for both the actual action itself and the funds.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Patrice also has a question. Patrice, I just unmuted your line.
Okay, can you hear us?
I can.
This is Craig, so we're doing this together. My question is one, is it possible that we could use those funds to do some of our training, but also incorporate 2Gen programming as part of that?
So it would, any activity and whatever funds are tied to it has to be has to be tied to unmet objectives. So whatever activity and therefore funds that are part of the carryover request have to be tied to some unmet objective. So the unmet objective would either have to be demonstrated through missing of certain quantifiable projections, or program plans that were demonstrated somehow through narrative form or whatever in your PPR that can be pointed to as these were not complete.
Okay.
It can't be necessarily for new activities that we have, we think this is a good idea, we have this other stuff going on, we're going to add it in. It can't be an add-on. It's like a new program or a new piece. It would be just for the achievement of a certain goal. Now, that said, so let's say something like training completions, right? Let's say we missed our training completion goal. In order to get those people through training completion, we might need to pay for training, supportive services, books, fees, instructor time, I don't know. Whatever the case is, there's other pieces that can be potentially tied to, to that unmet goal. There's smaller pieces there, but you would just have to, if whatever activities are planned and funds attached to those activities, they just have to be tied to unmet objectives. There's a question from Mark, so I'm going to read this out loud partly just to make sure I'm following. We have 60 people that were enrolled for programs in September for October 2016. Right now these 60 are enrolled in year 1, but we will pay for them with year 2 funds. Is that a problem? Goodness, excuse me. No, so that's a good question. So our budget years and our academic years do not line up, as probably everybody on this phone call can appreciate. So potentially, just regardless of carryover, potentially you all enrolled people into training, let's say in August, right? And they are, they're going through their semester now, and and it's obviously through December, right? And so we're currently in December. At some point, you had to switch over, even though they were enrolled in year 1, you had to switch over, or you will have to at some point, probably already did, hopefully, to pay for that person out of year 2 funds because it is currently year 2. So yes, even though you may enroll people in year 1 ended at the end of September, so year 2 funds have to kick in to start continuing to support that person. This is where the year the person enrolls is not tied just with the year that they enrolled. It's tied. The funds used to support a participant are tied to when an activity occurred for that participant. And so yes, you will and you know, if that person continues into year 3, you'll probably also use year 3 funds to pay for that person. That's totally fine and expected. This is carryover would just be a question of if you were taking year 1 funds into year 2. Oh, can carryover funds, sorry, thanks Mark. So the follow-up question is, can carryover funds be used for these year 1 participants? So it depends on what the unmet objective is. So potentially these people who were enrolled in September did not have a chance to complete their training or gain employment. So unmet objectives, you do not tie it to the year 1 participant. Well, you don't tie it directly to the year 1 participants. You tie it to the unmet year 1 goals. So potentially, if someone just started in September, they did not have enough time. You probably missed some completion or employment goals. Your carryover request would come from completion, unmet completion and employment goals, and you would say what additional funds you need to support those unmet objectives. So things like additional training funds, additional supportive services, additional career outreach, things of that nature. So that's where the carryover request comes in, and then that's where you would do it to that. So remember, when you do your carryover request, it's not tied to certain like it's not tied to a certain group of, you know, year 1 students or year 2. It's actually tied to the unmet objectives themselves. So it's all about what were the unmet objectives and what unmet objectives will be complete in year 2, and the money is tied to those unmet objectives, which are participants as well, but try to think of it that way. That might help.
So I'm not sure if you're done or not, Kim, but Tara Alatorre also has a question.
Great.
Hey, Kim. Actually, it was just answered through all of that, so I think I'm good now. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else? I'm just looking back through, make sure I didn't miss any other questions. I'm not seeing any other questions.
Nope, neither am I.
Okay, well, with that, I will just say thank you all for joining today. If you do have any other questions, please reach out to your program specialist or your Office of Grants Management specialist. And if you, and like I said in the webinar, please do discuss, plans, questions, anything like that with your program specialist ahead of your request, because they can probably help you think through, potential pitfalls or, reasonings or things of that nature too. So thank you all. Hope you all have wonderful holidays, restful, and get to spend time with family and friends. And again, thank you for all the great work you all do. And please let us know if, as you're going through these documents, if you come up with any questions. Thanks, everyone.